So before this video starts, I've got big news. I moved. I am back in California. Why? I'm not gonna say why yet, but I'm happy to be back. It's been a crazy month, and I'm looking forward to getting back to putting out videos. So we'll see how regularly this happens. I'm kind of in like a temporary living situation for a little bit, but as soon as we get some sort of a stability, then we'll also get a rhythm going and more videos will start coming out again soon. So look forward to that. For now, here's a piece I did like a month ago, and I'm just now getting ready to doing a video about it. So let's go. Hey everyone, I'm Mike Henry, and this is my Procreate 5 demo for the piece I call Braga, the Silver Arrow. So here is a character that I did at the beginning of August and posted it and stuff online, but then had all of the move stuff to have to do, and I just really didn't have time to do a video or really even do that much art, to be honest. And this character kind of represents the last major thing I did before I was just kind of too busy to really put anything serious down. Every time I would sit down to draw, it's like, oh, there's just way too many things I'm thinking about to do and all that kind of stuff. So recently I did a couple of new things that are really quick that I'll be posting, but it really was like a long time where I didn't do anything. Now, who is this character? What's he for? What's his point? The answer to all of those is, I don't know. I just kind of did him as a fun design to try and mix things up. After I completed the monster series, I just started doing a couple of other random pieces, which is what I said I was going to do. And then I was like, oh, maybe I'll start doing like a couple of more characters that are for something new. It's actually funny because if you took this character and just colored him like totally wildly, you could probably pull this character over to those characters. But what I was going for was actually more of like a high fantasy or like Final Fantasy, or like that type of a vibe of like this kind of like giant fantastical world with all of these very different types of characters. So the next type of characters that could be done to add on to this character would be like elves and fairies and elementals and like just stuff that's more in that vein and not in like the classic monsters neon synth wavy type thing. That was the idea behind this, which is why he's colored in a way that's just like super naturalistic, like he's in a desert scene. Now here you can see me in the ideation process. I slowed down the sketching quite a bit. The actual output of this video, I don't entirely know why, but it was really long. It was like a 25-minute time lapse, and I don't remember working on it for like such an exorbitant amount of time, but that's what was spat out. So I decided to slow down this phase and then really speed up through the other phases. Let's talk about my thought process here. So my thought process was really just that I wanted, it was actually really clear. I was just like, I want to do like a white furred desert beast guy. In fact, this file is still called Beast Guy, even though I've named it and named him as a character. What I thought of very, very quickly for a backstory, but again, there's no larger scheme to this. The monster ones, at least, I developed something that was like a little bit more of a framework, but with this, it's just literally like desert beast guy, and you come to him because you need something, and he helps you do a thing. Like, that's like it. It doesn't get much more elaborate than that. I think in the write-up that I put on Instagram, it was about you having to get somewhere, and so you're here to talk to Braga. And I named him the Silver Arrow because I wanted to have like a name that kind of it kind of starts to evoke like he has a reputation, and the fact that he's like white, maybe in the right desert sunlight. He's got like a silvery tone to his fur, and he's very quick and he gets you where you need to go. Is he quick because he is actually physically fast and the route he takes is fast, or is it because he knows how to kind of like grease the palms? Is that the right phrase? I think it is, right? Anyways, he knows how to like kind of like get you through the tougher spots of what you might have to navigate regarding like people, factions, etc., etc. So I wanted to kind of dress him as though he had this like desert life, so he doesn't have a whole lot of heaviness to his wardrobe. He's not exactly like a he's not like trudging through the sand. He's more like carefree, and he kind of has this light attitude, and this almost like when he's not doing something like that, he's just like kind of hedonistic and like laying around and maybe enjoys the finer things in life type vibe. So I wanted to try and communicate some of those things. So he's a little adorned. He's not crazy adorned, like he's not like piled on with like gems and stuff like that, but he's got, you know, like a ring on almost every finger, and he's got he's made some choices about how he wants to decorate himself. And so I think that that kind of at least goes a little bit further to show like what this guy's kind of into. He's got the pipe, so he's smoking something, and so it's just kind of showing that like this is a guy who maybe he's super capable and he can do like some really cool stuff and he can get you where you need to go, but he also just really likes his him time, his me time. So that was kind of the spirit behind the character. You could see it earlier part where I was really kind of trying to get that face right. I was originally going to have him be like a little goofier, and I do kind of like him having that sort of like goofy, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know, like I could probably think of characters out there that are similar to him. I don't know. I don't think I really need to over-explain this. I think you get where this guy's coming from based on the design and what little I've described already. So as far as the drawing of this, I actually thought what I would potentially do was just a clean drawing. I would almost color this similarly, but not exactly the same, to my A Village Corrupted characters, where it was like lines and flats and kind of just a little bit of embellishing, but nothing further than that, which is why you see more of a line-driven thing. But you'll notice as it goes on, I actually get a little bit looser with the lines, because I start thinking, no, I want to paint this, so let's just get enough lines in here so that I know what it is that I'm painting. A lot of people ask me about the transition of going from something that is lined to something that's painted, and how you kind of like make that leap. And to me, it's almost like if you could put training wheels on a bicycle that like get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and less and less and less supportive, as opposed to just kind of like having them on until you get it and then like taking them off. It's like an infinitely gradiating like training wheels. That's kind of how I think about lines, and like my own reliance on lines early on, and me trying to figure out like how I'm going to do art and all that kind of, or how I was going to do art and all that. When I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do artistically, just like as a kid and sort of like in high school and throughout that journey, it was all comic book art. So everything that I did was like line driven all the time. I didn't actually touch digital coloring really until I was like really far into college, and I was largely doing coloring in Flash. I was like, you know, trace bitmap and then fill. And that was largely how I colored. And I would like do the lines, and I would bend the lines so I could get them exactly where I wanted them, and the fill, you know, that type of a methodology. And then when I was actually like kind of like leaving college, I finally started to give Photoshop a shot. But I was still so line driven that it was really hard for me to get away from that. And so I completely understand when people really make a big deal out of that leap. How do I make that leap from lines to paints? Because some of you out there, you may have actually learned to paint before you learned to draw, or you may have learned to paint at the same rate as drawing. By the way, here's just a simple background. You can see how basic this background is. It's just there enough to support the idea of the character. And we'll embellish that a little bit more later in the piece, but that far back like sand dunes, those don't get changed at all, basically. So now this part's going to go a little quicker, and I'll get back to the topic I was discussing, but this is going to be the flat process, and I speed this up quite a bit just so that you can see it. This is fairly standard stuff. If you don't understand this process at all, definitely go back through old videos, because I have explained this ad nauseum, and I don't want to bore those who've seen it like a million times. The reason that I understand that giant leap is because I too went through that giant leap trying to go from somebody who really relied on lines to like, holy shit, I have to get rid of these lines. And I think it was like this, maybe it's the same for all of you out there who feel, who go through that big jump, is that you feel like, well, it's just rendering something, it's just sort of painting it and I just have to throw away the lines and I'll figure it out. It won't be that big of a deal. And then you actually go in to do it and you're like, oh my God, I feel so uncomfortable trying to pull this off. So the way that I solved it way back then was this kind of, and by the way, not in any kind of deliberate way, it was just sort of me tripping over myself to try and figure this out, is it was like, first it was like, okay, I'm just going to color with the lines. Cool. That's what a lot of you out there are probably doing. Leave the lines on, color, move on. Then over time, I got to where I was taking the lines and I was setting them to an overlay. Maybe a soft light sometimes, maybe a soft light and an overlay duplicated and then adjusting that. But the idea was I was starting to work where my lines were absorbing the color underneath. So the lines weren't going anywhere. They were still very much a part of the illustration, but now they were integrated more with the color. And I was starting to actually see what that interplay was like. And it was, I never was at a point where I felt like the lines had abandoned me. They were always there. They were just a little bit more fused. Then, as time went on, I shifted a little bit more towards setting the lines to a multiply, which is something that you see me do a lot here whenever I'm keeping the lines, but I want to have like that more of a color intermingling other than just, instead of just like a black line or a whatever solid colored line. And you can see that across all of my work. By the way, all of these methods that I'm talking about still pop up in my work depending on what I want the vibe of the piece to be. So multiply then was something where it was less about just like this instant fix of taking black lines and making them overlay, and it was much more about I have to choose now the color of the multiply, and then that's going to have a big impact on how the whole thing's going to read. And then over time it's like, okay, that multiply color can get a little lighter and a little lighter and a little lighter to the point to where it's got very little involvement actually in the illustration. Now, I didn't do all of this very robotically like I'm describing to you. It wasn't like this plan that I executed on. It was more just me playing with my own comfortability. Nowadays, what I do when I go to do a painting is you never see me on this channel or anywhere just paint. I just don't like it. I've done it numerous times and I've tried different methods to try and get it to work right, and I just don't like it. And honestly, that's one of those process things that not liking that is fine, and just don't do it. It's not something where like you're a weaker artist or you're not doing some process that other people enjoy, because someone might also say like, no, you just start throwing paint down. But if you ask that person to just flat out draw something, maybe they'd be like, oh, I don't like that. So much about art and being accomplished at art and feeling like you're accomplishing things and growing is about just doing the thing that's comfortable so that you can do a thing. A lot of people like to extol the virtues of being out of your comfort zone and pushing yourself. Those things are super important, and you should find ways to do that. But when you're already really struggling, pushing, that means you're already outside of your comfort zone anyways, right? And maybe you're even doing something that's battling your natural inclinations. That's when you kind of have to come out of your own head and think to yourself, is this the time to push myself and to be in like an uncomfortable territory? Or is this the time to actually pull back, go back to something I'm really comfortable with so that I can like accomplish the goals I'm trying to set? Something I've talked about on this channel before is even just finding the thing that's inspiring you while you're doing the work in your own work. Like if you are a paid professional and you are doing art for hire, you have to just do the art, right? You are still trying to find the inspiration so that you get some enjoyment out of it. You don't want this to be a death march. You're doing art, right? It's not supposed to be very painful, but there is some aspect of doing commercial art and paid work that's just like, well, this isn't the thing I would draw right now if I could pick whatever I wanted to draw, but I'm just gonna buckle down and get it done. When you're doing work that's more about like your own growth and your own satisfaction, you do have to find inspiration in your piece, because otherwise, like, why are you doing it? You're there to do something that's like exciting and cool. Are you supposed to be learning? Yeah, sure, you could learn some stuff, but if you're sitting down to do the art solely to learn, that is a very different behavior. That is you identifying something that you think you need to grow at. If you find that that's also fun, that it's fun to do the learning, like, I'm not going to stop you. I'm just saying that when you find that you are just doing something academically because you feel like you should, almost like, oh, well, I've heard this is the thing I'm supposed to be doing, but oh god, this sucks, you might want to reevaluate that. So when we get back, let's rewind now all the way back to lines and how I work with lines now. What I do is I draw the thing, and then I lower the opacity. It's that simple. And then when I have established enough on the paint side that I feel like the lines become less significant, I either turn them off, or the whole thing is just a stepped process of turning the lines down, turning the lines down, turning the lines down, to the point to where they're just like, if they're like 3% opacity, you probably don't need them anymore, and you can just kind of kill the lines. But that's the jumping off point. And by jumping off point, I mean the jumping off the cliff point. Like, that's where you're just like, I am abandoning the lines fully, and I am in paint land. That doesn't mean that you won't turn them back on again at some point. Something you'll see a lot of the times when you're watching these time lapses is you'll see the lines go away and then the lines come back. Or the lines will get way turned down, or they get way stronger again. It all depends on the values of the things that you're working with. It depends on how much information you need. It depends on, like, you might be rendering up some part, like in this case, since he's got this stark white fur, there's times where I might not need those lines anymore, but then when I go back in to do like the cowl around his neck, then it's like, oh shit, I gotta turn that back on and get those lines back so that I remember what I was doing here. Like, why is this the way it is? Now, why do you need to turn the lines back on if you've already sort of, if you're creating it? Like, why do you need that information again? Well, it's because every decision that you make in a piece of art is like it's building off of something else you've already done. So if you put lines down, and then your next step was you put flats down that respect those lines, then that means when you go in to do the paint part, you might have some sort of a characteristic of that flat that you are now going to reinterpret in a new way. Is that new way better than the lines? I guess it technically could be, but you've already done all of that work. You solved forms when you were doing the lines, and you solved forms when you were doing the flats, because you're now building off those lines and you're saying this is going to stick out this way or that's going to stick out that way. And so why not turn those lines back on so that you can go back to referencing how you were building that whole thing in the first place, and just keep reinforcing these decisions that you made earlier. If you identify at some point that those earlier decisions actually weren't great, cool, that's a completely different thing. That's where you're actually reevaluating what you've done and said, this doesn't work, I'm going to change it. Maybe you go back to the lines to change it, maybe you just change it in the painting, but that's kind of a different process as far as I'm concerned. So the speed at which we're now watching this time lapse is very close to the way it just spits out the time lapse. We slowed it way down for the line drawing part, we sped it up for the flats part, and now I've just kind of let it roll in the background for things like the ambient occlusion pass and the shadows, the cast shadows. What you're seeing me start to do here is on the tufts of fur across his body, like on his elbows and on his tummy and on his armpits and his tail, we're putting in like a little bit of a darkening. We're trying to create some sort of a patterning to imply like what his species might have as far as markings go. Maybe it's maybe they all look exactly the same. All their markings are the same. Maybe it's something that has a huge variety. Maybe we take that tack of, you know, he's I don't know, based off of wolves and big cats. So these types of people can be tiger striped, or they can look like a wolf from Alaska, or they can look like a dingo or a hyena. Who knows? Maybe it's super wide open, or maybe all of his species are just like white furred with this like dark gray tufting kind of happening. He's got a little bit of a brown, like gray brown, like dancing on his shoulders and the top of his head as well. But anyways, since this is a character who lives, he begins and ends in this illustration basically, all we can do is kind of extrapolate what other people of his species might look like. If this were done as a piece of concept art for a project, this would not be enough. You would want to generate other supporting pieces that were either about his race, about him, maybe exploring more patterns other than just what I decided, because when you're doing this for yourself, you just kind of make the decisions on the fly. Maybe all of these solutions are not the best solutions, and you need to bring more ideas to the table so that you can make different calls. You're seeing some design embellishments on the cloth that's wrapped around his head, as well as the cloth, which is sort of, they're both referencing each other, that is around his waist, creating this like sash belt situation that he's got below. And then when this is all done, these embellishments and the ambient occlusion stuff, we are going to start on the cast shadow. This is where we're doing a lot of implying of the environment that he's in. So it will get further built out a little bit, the like kind of canopy that he's under. But as you can see right now, we've got this stick in the top left with like some rope around it. We've got this kind of like cloth looking thing that's breaking the top right corner of the frame. And then he's like just kind of neutrally lit right now. So roll right there it goes. There is the cast shadow. So now what we're doing when we do that is we're not just saying that there's some thing breaking the top right, or it's just some cloth piece that whatever. We're trying to anchor him in the environment and indicate more about the environment beyond him. So this is us saying there is some sort of a canopy that is above him. We are just taking shadow and we're saying like, and we're just putting it all across there, blocking that whole thing out. Now we're gonna go in and actually create the light that isn't directly just being blocked by the canopy, but like how are the parts of him going to cast shadows across him, and how are we going to set up all of that. So we kind of do that big first blocking so that we can say like, cool, that's where the shadow gets cast. And now we're going in and doing the finer stuff, the stuff that's more about the form and how it's being cast and all of that kind of stuff. What we're going to ultimately want to do with this is we're going to want to establish that, and then also establish like tons of bounce light. Since he's in such a bright environment, we're going to want to really accent that. So we'll get to that eventually, but the work going in right now is about those shadows. So why did I make the background here this color that's in the background? It's actually simple. I've talked about this with other pieces where there's like a issue with the value of the background and the character. We know that that character is going to get shadow and definition, and we're going to be able to separate him from the background. But right now, before all of that goes in, he's a white character against an almost white background. So seeing where all of those edges are can be kind of difficult. And this kind of goes back to other things that I've also referenced, where you're trying to help yourself out as much as possible as an artist. You're not trying to do it like, I mean, there's no value in, it's like, what is that, isn't there that old Dr. Seuss book that like I can read with my eyes closed or whatever? It's like the same concept as that, basically. So you can see now that so much of the shadow has been put in, the cast shadow as well as the other supporting shadows. We have separation of the character from the background, but that's why the background was made dark for a minute, so that we could see that more clearly. The only time that really sucks is like because of Procreate's layer limit. Sometimes you're just like, I want to make the background dark real quick, and so you go to create a new layer, and it's like, nope, it's like, fuck. But anyways, this is the that's the point of that. So now we're onto the bounce stage. There's going to be some other little tricks that I employ here, like the bloom that's like bleeding into the shadowed part. And I suppose I could do a quick demo on how to do that. I don't know if I've done that before. Well, it's going to be coming up in a minute, so let's go ahead and do a quick demo of that. Okay, so I wasn't planning on doing any type of a further demo on this than just kind of explaining it, but I thought that it would be kind of, I guess it's good to go ahead and try to show this off. So we've got the more or less final version of the image here. I've turned off a few things like that, but this is just so that we can talk about that one little trick of getting the bloom. Now, I honestly do not remember if I've ever explained this before, so I'm going to go ahead and explain it again. So as an example of what I'm talking about, let's zoom in right here. This is the most obvious spot where we can show this off. Sorry, my dog is being really annoying and it's kind of distracting me. Okay, there we go. So, we need to have bloom because the light is hitting off of this bright white area, and then that would bloom out into the shadow a little bit. At least that's the lighting premise that we're operating under. So how do we do that? Oh, let's turn on what I've already got actually in the file so you can see what I'm talking about. That's what we're talking about that's in the file already. Okay, so how do we do that? In Procreate. I think the in Procreate part is the important part, simply because there are way more tools to do things like duplicating masks, layers and folders and stuff in Photoshop. So in Procreate, how do I go about doing this? Well, let's take this lighting and actually let's turn off the shadows. The cast shadow, the big cast shadow. So now we've got the character with essentially all of the other lighting except for that bloom, the big cast shadow, and then the sort of like extra features that get turned on towards the end. So this is all going to exist underneath that anyway, so it's not that big of a deal to turn those off. We do have some like bloom type things, or not bloom, sorry, some bounce light type things happening here, but we are going to essentially ignore the existence of those. We're not gonna get too hyper specific about this. This is going to be just about that one little trick. And if you're hearing a loud beeping in the background, I apologize. I'm living near a building that's being built, so there's like this like truck that's constantly backing up apparently. Okay, so how do we do this? I will take what you see right here, and let me just double check what I've got here. Right, okay, so let's flatten that, or excuse me, let's turn that off. Let's take our flat layer and we're gonna flatten it. Boom. That basically gives us, if I turn this off, that gives us one layer that's just this. I'm going to select that layer and hit copy. See, it said at the top, copied layer. And then I'm going to undo everything that I just did. So the background, so it undoes the copy, although that's nothing. It doesn't actually undo the copy. And then we're going to undo that visibility, and this is the important one. Undo the flattened layer group. You saw that pop down at the top. So now we're back to having all of our layers, and that's what we're looking for. Let's turn this back on. And let's get back into these layers. We are going to use that thing that we just copied. This is an empty layer, by the way, that I created earlier. And what we're going to do is we're going to come to this wrench in the top left, go to the Add tab within that, and select Paste. Okay, we just pasted that flat in. Now, the flat is actually not the important thing that we need as far as the content of it, outside from the fact that it now gives us an awesome selection, which is what we're looking for. We want to tap on that layer, and then you see right here towards the top, it's select. So we have now selected, basically, you could think of it like a mask, although we're not actually applying a mask, we're just selecting that. We're going to turn it off for a second. So now what we're doing is we have essentially selected his body shape. Now, if you want to copy a bunch of things that are visible, not just the contents of a layer, and I'm going to create a new layer here right now, what you do is you go to the wrench again and see right here you got copy canvas. That's a bit of a misnomer because it doesn't actually copy the canvas, it copies everything visible. And if you have a selection, everything visible within that selection. So we hit that copy, you saw it for a second, it popped down with like copy canvas or whatever, and then we're going to hit paste. So now what we've done is we've pasted in fact, I'm going to move this out just so that you can see clearly. We have, look at that, we have everything that we've painted all merged into one layer, basically, a new layer. Which on Photoshop, you would do that by like selecting and holding Alt and saying like merge layers, and then it would merge everything into a new layer. Here, we have to do it in this slightly janky way. So now let's turn all of this back on again. Some of the stuff that's being turned on you can't see because it's underneath. Let's turn that back on. Okay, let's move this back into our stack approximately where we would want the bloom to exist. So what do we do now? I'm going to turn my shadow layers back on again because I think it's going to make it clearer so you can see what we're doing. We are going to select this shadow layer. This is where all the cast shadows are. We're going to say select, and then we're going to clear from this completely merged layer that we have. So select that and then say right there, clear. Right now it just basically looks like the illustration is like fine. But what we have here is we actually have a layer that is, you could say basically all of the like mids and up. It's not truly all the mids and up. It's like most honestly just everything that's not that cast shadow. But we are going to what we're trying to do is we're trying to embrace the fact that we've just kind of created a layer that's like all of our mids and up. Again, not exactly, but we're going to get around the fact that it's not all of the mids. It's got some darks in there in a second. So now what we'll do is we'll take this layer, and if you're experimenting with this, I would recommend duplicating the layer at this point. Just duplicate it. Oh, I'm at my layer limit. That's awesome. Let's delete this old one here, and then we can do it. So you duplicate it, and now you can experiment with this all you want, and then delete your sort of like safe layer after you've got the look you're going for. So let's delete that. Now what we're going to do is hit our little magic wand and go to our Gaussian blur. So if you're unfamiliar with the way Gaussian blur works, it's really simple. You put your pen or your finger down on the screen and you drag from left to right, and as you drag from left to right, it blurs more or less. We're looking for a noticeable but understated blur. So if you look, it'll go like, let's say that. Now, as far as a blur goes, I mean, that's super blurry, right? Like you can see, let's exit the blur mode. You can see here, that's just crazy blurry, but this isn't what we care about. This is what we care about, how the light is bleeding into the shadow. So how do we clean this up? It's pretty simple. We only care about what's bleeding into the shadow. So we reselect that shadow, select. And now you can see here at the very bottom, now that we're in selection mode, there's a button that says invert. Before I hit that, I'm going to just show a quick trick that not everybody knows. I'm going to go ahead and tap just my, whoops, that was an accident. I'm going to tap my layers just so that you can see what happens when we've exited the selection screen. And I'm going to show you that if you hold on select, it brings those controls back up again. Good to know, right? Also, if you were to unselect everything and you held down that selection again, it would reselect and then bring up your controls, which is nice. So down at the bottom here, we're going to tap on invert. And so this has now selected everything that's not the shadows. And we're going to come over to our bloom layer and clear it, because the thought process here is we're blurring the brights so that they go into the dark, and then we want to get rid of all of the brights that are on top of the brights, and we only want that bloom that's creeping into the shadows. So now on here we say clear right there, and what do we have? We have this area is completely unaffected, and the shadows have the bloom happening, and if we toggle this, it's really clear what's happening there. Now you may have noticed in my oh, actually, one other thing that I happen to choose to do on this, although you could go lots of different ways with it, is I set this to an overlay. So that's what an overlay looks like, and then that's what normal looks like. Normal is going to be more of like an intense kind of even bloom effect, whereas overlay is going to have a little bit more of a slight saturation boost and an intenser fall off. So it's going to be a little brighter at the beginning of a gradient and a little more saturated towards the end, as opposed to just flat out like the white being a gradient. So that is that, but you'll notice that in the final image, I actually have a more intense bloom happening right here, because I just thought that was a really key area to like build that up. So I'm not going to do it right now, but basically what I did was I took this layer, well, I'll just do this part, I duplicated it, and then I eliminated all of the other bloom except for along that, which is the layer that I have right here. So you can see right there, it's just like an extra oomph to that bloom. And then of course, flipping on all of the other layers and stuff takes us like the rest of the way. So I hope that shows you like a little trick with that bloom, but the thing is, I talk about this all the time, it's not about the specific trick. If you want to try out that specific trick, that's dope, and you can incorporate that into lots of different things. But the important thing is to actually think about the process behind that and the logic around this trick, so that you can do other similar tricks to achieve different looks in other ways. Like if you want to try something that isn't a bloom, but maybe there is a trick where you're duplicating something, blurring it, and then clearing something, and it gets you what you're looking for using this methodology. So now that that's been fully explained, I think as this goes on, you'll be able to see that when it pops up, and you'll know what goes on there, because the way the time lapse captures something like that, because it's like selections and duplications and blurs, it's just gonna be like suddenly it'll be there, and then suddenly it just like moves on to the next thing, because it's just kind of sudden in that way. Right now, Bloom is, God, I keep saying Bloom instead of Bounce. Bounce Light is happening, and that is happening just kind of generally across it. I'm going through the way that I kind of organize that part of my process is it's not the most scientific thing, but I basically try to highlight anything in my mind. Sorry, I try to highlight anything that's a specific material, like metal or plastic, and I kind of put that like to the side, and then I go through the image kind of like section by section, and I look at the geometry of that particular part, and I think about the lighting that's around it and try to throw in. I have like one layer that's like, let's say 30%, and I sample colors and put it in and move on. And then when I get to the metal stuff, I treat that a little bit differently because it's going to be a little bit more intense. So I would crank up the opacity on that. I just realized while I was talking about that, a million things just happened on screen. All you really need to know there is that I wanted the background to be a little bit more elaborate and fill in some of the empty space there. And so we've got extra cloth hanging down. We added an extra, well, right there's the extra wood pole that's like holding up part of the tent. To be totally honest, placing that is challenging because there's a lot going on in that part, so you can see me getting that stick like just right, because there's just so much going on there, trying to maintain clarity of his hand pose and what that stick is like doing and not get too jammed up and all of that. We added some extra light hitting the top of the tent. For a second you may have seen me play with a lens flare. That was just me saying like, well, is there a way to bring more of this like heat and intensity to this? But I mean, lens flares are usually considered a little cheesy. Sometimes I like putting them in because they're cheesy, but I end up going away from that. Now this would be the phase where I actually thought the piece was done, and then I shared it with like a friend, and for instance in this case Renato I shared it with, and he pointed out that the way that the pipe was pointed before was too noisy. It wasn't a clear silhouette, so I moved the pipe up and then went in and just did like a little bit of extra noodling here or there to try and bring some more life to the character, tweak a couple of little things like fur, as well as adjusting some of the reflections and other things. So this was more the just I pondered it for a while, and now I'm going back in and noodling all the last bits of details. And right there, that's the final version of the piece. It's good to show the value of kind of like noodling at the end. So right here, this is the version of the image that I actually had where I thought I was like done. And then I sat on it a little bit, and then I added this to it to try and like take it up to a new level, and then actually had a little bit further to go, and then this is truly the final version of the image right here. Shows sometimes it's good to give a little extra time to think about it before you call it done. So thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider hitting like and consider subscribing, and I'll see you on the next video. And if you're looking for me on the internet, these are the places where you can find me.